All right, what's going on, everybody? Trade deadline is basically about 48 hours away. We got some news and notes to get into. So, this is Green with Envy. Let's lock in. What up, what up, what up? What's going on, everybody? This is your boy Will Weir checking in. How you doing? How you living? As you can see on the screen today, joining me, my podcasting cousin from across the pond, the lead writer of Celtics blog, and of course, the leader of the Taylor gang to talk about anything and everything trade deadline related. It's my guy, Adam Taylor. What's popping, Adam?
Yo, what's good, man? Trade deadline's right around the corner. I've wrote two different trade articles today of who I'd like to see. One a guard, one a big. I'm excited, man. This is always a fun time of year.
Yeah, dude, this is great, man. We got roughly about 48 hours until the trade deadline hits, which is going to be on Thursday at, I believe it's 3 p.m. Eastern time. So we've got a lot of news and notes that are kind of flying around. Right now, it's a little bit quiet. So Adam and I wanted to start kind of addressing some. Adam mentioned before he's got a couple of written articles that we're going to use as a jump off point. But as we're going through this, please comment, send us some questions that you got. I know from our Discord, we got a few that we'll get to here. But Adam, the question of the day right now, and it feels like for the Celtics, and I think Adam Himmelsbach had this just earlier today, that it feels like for the Celtics, there's a move coming. It's going to be a minor move. I wouldn't expect anybody from that top 8-9. So Peyton Pritchard, probably pretty secure. Al Horford, definitely secure. So it's going to be something a little bit more minor. But let's start here, Adam. Do you think the Celtics should go more guard focused or more big focused? And remember, as this, for the context of those listening, this is the insurance. This is insurance that we're talking about. Think about your own life insurance, your car insurance. You only use it when you absolutely have to. And that's the type of players that we're looking at. But Adam, do you want to start looking at the guard options, the big options, or where do you think the focus should be?
It's tough, right? Like, as you said, this is insurance. And I always think back to that Chris Rock skit where he's like, you might as well call it in case shit. I'm going to get this in case shit happens. Let's start with the guards. I think that's the easier place to start. Smaller guys, there's probably a few more of them than what there are in terms of big men. I bet it's nobody. Yeah, that's always the way Brad is.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that just because it's never happened before doesn't mean it won't happen this time. It's not like we have a huge data pool of years with Brad running the team that we can really lean into. So the guards that I've kind of seen
the only thing we know about him, Adam, is that he hates draft picks. That's the only thing that we can confirm, is that Brad Stevens hates first round draft picks.
And I've said this, like, to me, that's more, I saw how much stick Danny got that Danny can't draft. So I'm just not going to use draft picks. No one cares if a second rounder doesn't work, right?
Right. So
like,
I'm just messing around. It's all circumstantial. But back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really intrigued to see what happens when he does have to start using picks, because of his talent evaluation seems to be, well, we know how good his talent evaluation is at this point. Some of the names that I've seen floated around: Javon Carter from Chicago, Chris Dunn from the Utah Jazz. I wrote a piece on that earlier today. Those are kind of like the two primary ones that I've got my eye on. Delon Wright's also been mentioned. I know that Michael Scotto from Hoops Hype reported that he's a name. Boston have reportedly, and then we're going to use air quotes here, checked in on. As far as we know, checked in on is, hey, how much do you want for Javon Carter? For Carter, how much do you want for Delon Wright? And then it's always key to remember that all this reporting that comes out, all this sourced reporting, it's coming from somewhere, and wherever it's coming from, there's an agenda there.
Right.
Like, you're either trying to deter teams, you're trying to drum up additional interest, you're trying to use one team as leverage because you're having behind the scenes talks with other teams.
And so it could be agents too, right? It could be agents of these players that are like, come off season. Hey, man, do you see how in demand Kelly Olynyk was? He was in rumors with the Celtics. He was in rumors with the Mavs. He was in rumors with this team. Like, you got to pay my guy. Like, my guy, look at my guy's wanted around this league. Like, so it's also the agents building up their own individual clients.
Exactly. So there's so many ways that this news leaks. There's so many reasons that it leaks. And that's definitely what I try to be cognizant of when I'm looking at this. But it's also really easy to just fall into as I did this morning, like, Chris Dunn would be quite a decent addition to this team. Delon Wright would not be bad. Do you know what I mean? And it's not, they would be an upgrade over Pritchard. Like, a big word that I've seen tossed around this year when like reading like reports and stuff is optionality. And it's having that optionality to go a different route, to be like, right, Pritchard's not scoring tonight, or he's being attacked too much, or we're struggling to get him going downhill. Oh, we have a Delon Wright, we have a Chris Dunn that give you more size, that maybe have more burst on that first step. Maybe they bring some more playmaking instead of scoring. It's just an optionality where you can lean in one way instead of having to be like, well, Pritchard's not working, but our next best option is Delano Banton.
Right. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
So now you have multiple options, right? And so let's start with Chris Dunn, because you wrote about him today for Celtics Film Room, which, by the way, if you guys are not subscribed to Celtics Film Room, you should be. Adam, where can they find the link for Celtics Film Room if they want to sign up for it?
It's on my Twitter page. It's on my Instagram stories. It's everywhere.
There it is. There it is. Make sure you sign up for it. But you wrote about Chris Dunn, and Chris Dunn's actually a name that I brought up way back in December when we did our Bleacher Report live stream. And, you know, he's just a guy that's always been kind of interesting because he is, you know, he went to Providence, so he's somewhat of a, you know, a local product, if you will. And I know going into the draft back, you know, 6-7 years ago, whatever it was now, I was really big on Chris Dunn. I thought Chris Dunn was going to be awesome. And he's always kind of had that defensive upside that you wrote about. And it's been the offensive side in Utah that has started to click for him a bit more. He's been in and out of the starting line. It's been a really nice piece for Utah. But with Chris Dunn, it's more just a, you know, they have Jordan Clarkson, they have Keontae George, they have Colin Sexton. So there's a lot of guards that need playing time. And Will Hardy's done a great job kind of spacing out, getting everybody involved. He gave a great interview on the Ryan Russillo podcast about a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, where he talked about the importance of keeping everybody engaged. And so he's done a great job of that. But the fact that they've turned Chris Dunn into a guy that we're now saying, hey, maybe we can get him for, you know, a second or 2 seconds, put him into the TPE, maybe not to give up anybody. You brought up a really good point in Celtics Film Room that I think for me adds to not just the optionality that if Peyton Pritchard, you know, isn't hitting his shots, you got someone else that you can go to here that gives you another angle. Is that because, once again, the key word, we're talking about insurance. Sometimes we're not, whoever the Celtics trade for in the next 48 hours, we may never really see them in any meaningful way. Think Mike Muscala last year, like never really had a meaningful moment in the Celtics run. But you brought up a point in your article where you talked about, in a worst case scenario, let's say Derek White or Drew Holiday were to go down for a few games or a period of time. As much as we really like Peyton Pritchard, and I think Pritchard on a night-to-night basis, what he can do shooting the basketball and the way he plays, if you just need 10 to 15 minutes, I still think he would probably be the better fit over Chris Dunn. But now let's change the scenario, and you need somebody that's going to keep your defense at the level that we've seen it be. Now, if you need somebody to come in for 15 to 20 minutes, you got to split up that time with Pritchard and a guy like Chris Dunn to fill the shoes of a Derek White and Drew Holiday, which is really tough to do. Chris Dunn is actually probably a little bit more equipped with his skill set to be a guy that's in that, you know, 1-2-2 pressing zone, if you want to go to a look like that, which I know you highlighted as well. Like, I think that's where it gets really interesting, and why I feel like Chris Dunn has always been somebody at the top of my mind that would be at the top of my wish list. And to the point that we had in the comments here, as far as I know, I don't think there's been a ton of direct rumors, just more Chris Dunn's kind of in the ether, right? He's just in the conversation of people could look at him based on scenario. But that would, for me, is a huge reason why Chris Dunn is at the top of my wish list over the next 48 hours.
I mean, he brings playmaking off the dribble and makes smart decisions. I went back and watched about 70% of his assists on the season. Most of them, I'd say a good 90%, one pass assists. It's just next pass available assist. He's not trying to do anything flashy. He's playing within his role. His shooting numbers look great, but the key sticking point for me there was that, you know, he's shooting 41% from deep, but it's on 1.6 attempts per game. Now, if you're asking him to come in and assume a bigger role because of an injury or a reason that you're out, whether it's highly unlikely that that level of like consistency from the perimeter is going to stick, because obviously you're going to scale his attempts, which means you're probably bringing that average a little bit down. But again, he's closer to the type of insurance that I'd want, because you can always, the thing with Pritchard is, it's easy to forget that in his first season with Boston, he was played as an off guard. He was off ball. He had to work. He was operating as an inverted screener, a floor spacer. There's a world where Pritchard doesn't really lose minutes here, but maybe O'Shea Brissett takes a hit a little bit. I don't know. Maybe you only use Dunn as an optionality option. So some nights maybe he gets DMPs. Like, I'm not really worried about how these guys are feeling because that's not my job to worry about that. But I do think that Dunn is a good option. I'd also wouldn't mind taking a closer look at Javon Carter. I don't think that's a bad option, but I just think that he's closer to Pritchard than he is to Dunn in terms of skill set, right? And that's where that crossover comes in. And I'm like, that's when guys' noses get put out of joint. I know a lot of people I've seen on Instagram and on Twitter have said, like, hey, you know, we've got great chemistry. Any moves that get made, we need to make sure we maintain that chemistry. And that's why one of the big things for me when looking at targets has been, what do they bring that's different to what's already in the rotation? So nobody's fighting for the exact same role. It's every time you make a change, you're changing the dynamic and the structure of the system.
And that last point is also why, while maybe it's boring if there's not a big splashy move, but sometimes that's the best move that you can make. And one of the things for me that I always look back on was, I believe it was the 2009-2010 season when the Celtics had Shaq, right? Yeah. And they ended up making the move to trade Perkins for Jeff Green, which in a vacuum, Jeff Green is more talented than Kendrick Perkins. Shout out to Jeff Green still being in the league and being productive. Jeff Green was the better player in that deal, right? Now, obviously, he had the heart condition. There were a bunch of things that happened. Shaq then got hurt. But for me at the time, while knowing that Jeff Green was the more talented guy, what I think the Celtics didn't quite factor in was the continuity. Right. And that team, that championship team. And for so many years, all we had heard is the Celtics starting five has never lost, you know, yada, 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 like whatever. But that for me, aside from Shaq not being able to hold up, aside from, you know, Jeff Green having the issues, like it never really felt great after that trade. And part of that for me is that continuity. And so I do think that's important. And I think that's also part of the reason you're not going to see, certainly Al Horford, for many reasons, on court and continuity wise, he's not getting moved. But I think even Peyton Pritchard's a part of that. Like, Peyton Pritchard is a part of this culture. And the reason we keep bringing him up is, if you want anybody, like there's the Kelly Olynyk rumors that were out there in that same Michael Scotto article as well. Like, to get to that, or to get to this Caruso deal that I know Greg has talked about a couple times here as being a dream scenario, like you have to put Peyton Pritchard in those deals to make it work. And it's still a long shot to make it work. And I think there's a reason that you're not seeing the Celtics be overly interested in breaking that up, because there is something to that connectivity, to having that continuity. And that's why a lot of these moves are going to be made here on the fringes. So with that, Adam, let's transition to the bigs for a little bit here, right? Because also, you know, one of the rumored guys, I just mentioned Kelly Olynyk, that seems to be a really long shot. Like, it's a really complicated process for that trade to even happen, with roster spots both in Utah and what the Celtics have to add in salary wise to get there if it's not Al Horford. And I'll tell you right now, it's just not going to be Al Horford. Even with Joel Embiid out, doesn't make any sense for it to be Al Horford, as much as Kelly is a great fit for this team and would be an awesome move. It's just really hard to get there. But then other bigs that you've seen, Andre Drummond's been a guy that you've been big on, and you wrote about him today for Celtics.
Yeah, so that's not out yet. That okay. It's wrote. It's waiting to be edited. That will either be out later today or tomorrow.
It's on you, Bill. Come on, Bill. Get it out there to the people.
You might be watching. I think for me, the big thing I've done, and sticking with continuity kind of narrative for the moment, a lot of the players that I'm showing interest in from a let me explore how they would work kind of standpoint have been TPE guys. You've got that open roster spot. You can throw a couple of second rounders in there to sweeten the deal. If you need to move on from a Delano Banton or a Stevens, you can do that and not worry about how it's affecting the culture too much. But Drummond to me has been a guy that, if you go back over the years and you like do a Twitter search and look for Drummond with me in there, I've been dead set against the guy for years because my biggest thing was because under Brad Stevens, under Ime Udoka, it was very much a switch 1 through 5 defensive system. And everyone was talking about Drummond being a good fit, but you'd have to change the way you play defense to make that work. Drummond's not a switch guy. He's going to be playing a deep drop If he gets pulled too far out from the paint, he loses his effectiveness. He doesn't really have the hip flexibility to stay with guys when they beat him off the dribble. So I was always against it. Now, fast forward to now, Joe Mazzulla switches 1-3-4 with 5 in drop consistently. Like, there are different wrinkles he throws in there. Sometimes we see guys up to touch, some guys we see guys switch 1-3-5, but for the majority, we have a drop defense now. Drummond makes sense now. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you go over to cleaning the glass, for his entire career, he's been in the top 10 percentile wise of defensive rebounding guards in the league. He's in the 100th percentile this season. He's pulling down almost.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, his per 36 rebounds this year is like 17, 18, or 19 a game.
Dude,
like,
it's ridiculous.
Something crazy.
Dude, it's ridiculous. And I think that when you look at that in a vacuum, along with the physicality that he can bring, a lot because of the big body and needing a physical presence that you can throw in there to muck things up against a team like Miami or Orlando that are going to try and punch you in the mouth. Plus the fact he's got veteran experience. I do think that in a vacuum, he's an upgrade over Luke Cornett. In my opinion, you'd bring in Drummond, slow Cornett down to 4th in that big man rotation, because Quater, you've got 2 options with Quater. You keep him as he is right now, and then come the playoffs, you can't use him because he's a 2-way guy. Or you convert him, but then I'll start to go backwards and forwards, the same thing as what we spoke about with Dunn. Okay, so say Horford goes down for a couple of weeks, or Porzingis goes down for a stretch. Yeah. Do you feel Luke Cornett's then going to be elevated? So now if you've signed Quater, you've got to elevate him too. Do you feel comfortable with Nimi playing 10 minutes a night in the postseason on a game 6 of the second round? Like, I don't. I'd feel more comfortable going to Drummond and knowing, like, hey, we can live or die with this because he's got 12 years or whatever it is experience in the NBA. And that's kind of my thinking. And again, he fits in the TPE, 2 second rounds. Thank you very much. And isn't expiring. So if it doesn't work out, he can leave at the end of the season. If it does, you can re-sign him on a minimum and everyone's happy.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think when it comes to Drummond, for me, I'm also not the biggest Drummond guy, but if it's going to cost you practically nothing, then I think it's a kind of a no-brainer move, right? Like there's very little downside, because every possibility that currently exists would still exist if you bring in Andre Drummond and you're giving up, 2 late second-round picks. The Celtics have a bunch of weird second-round picks that are the worst of, insert 3-4 teams. So there's a bunch of different ways that they could do it with very limited risk and put him in to that TPE. So I agree with you in that standpoint. I think the one part that I probably am not convinced of is that he would actually supplant Luke Cornett as far as like when you look at the depth chart, if we're going Porzingis, Horford.
And that's fair.
But I do think that could change series to series depending on who you're playing or even within the series. Because one thing I've been very surprised about with the Celtics team is how good of a rebounding team they are, right? The fact the Celtics are first in the NBA in rebounding, at least last I checked, like that was not an area that I was convinced was going to be a super strong strength of this team. Super strong strength. Ooh, it's good. All right.
So tongue twister, man.
So yeah, right. That kind of got me caught up for a second. But I wasn't convinced that was going to be a big part of this team. And they've been really, really good, surprisingly good in that area. But Drummond, I would, to your point of Drummond versus Neemias, like where would I lean? You got to go with the veteran, I think, even though we've seen some really nice things out of Queta so far. You would probably have to lean in to the veteran in that particular scenario. So if we're bringing in Drummond and that leaves Neemias at his 2-way status, which I don't know how that would impact what options that leaves going forward, but I'm sure that's also a part of this as well, is what options you would have or maintain with him going into the offseason and going into next year, and where Drummond could be just a rental, right? And that's fine. That's all you need right now is a rental, is you want to have optionality once again, like we've talked about from the guards. Now you have it with the bigs. Like I still think you would go Porzingis, Horford, Cornett would get most nights, but in the right scenario, hey, Cornett, take a back seat. We're throwing in Drummond for 8 minutes here just to be big, to go be a body, to go get as many rebounds as he possibly can in that time frame. Like I think there's going to be matchups where that does work out. So I think all of this is depending on price, but if the price is right, give me Andre Drummond. Like I don't see how that's going to hurt this team, even if he's not my favorite guy.
Yeah, for me, I think the one difference with me is I think Drummond gives you a lot more as a screener than what Cornet does. I think
Mhm.
Cornet's a more intelligent role man. I think he makes better decisions on the
Yeah.
roll. He's a
Yeah,
better,
I love Cornette's IQ with this team. This
yeah,
is kind of back to the continuity, right? This is
yeah,
Luke's 3rd year in Boston, I believe. And like he is connected with these guys up and down the roster. Like that's something that's I think very apparent to me when I see Luke on the court is that whether he's there with the Bus One boys or he's out there with the Jays and Derek White, Drew Holiday, like he
living
has
it
a
up.
connection with these guys. Like so to me, I think that's what would elevate it because obviously from your point of what you're making here with the screens, just look at the body types. Clearly, Andre Drummond, I think, is gonna win that battle.
And then when you look at what Boston run a lot of on the offensive end with their screening actions, they like to run a lot of flare actions. They like to run a lot of high pick and roll with secondary screens, flow into stagger screens. The amount of separation that Drummond's going to give you, like
Mm-hmm.
I envision it like, can you imagine Tatum coming off a Luke Cornett screen in one possession and then coming off an Andre Drummond screen in the second possession, and the amount of space that the difference in space that's created? As I say, I do think Cornett's a better role man, but I think that Drummond is a better kind of like perimeter screening threat, especially in like veer actions and stuff. So I do see a world where he could usurp, usurp
Mm-hmm.
Cornet in that rotation for those reasons. Offensively as well, I think he's gives you more of a body on the offensive glass, gives you a little bit more vertical spacing in the dunker spot, can run some DHOs and be like a DHO hub. He can just, again, it's optionality. He gives you
Yeah.
something different, and that's the biggest thing for me because Porzingis is a finesse big. Cornet is a finesse big. Al Horford is an IQ big. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have somebody to put in there to just be the brute force kind of
Right.
attack. Do you know what I mean? So Drummond's high on my list. Nick Richards is another name that got floated around. I know Jake Fisher mentioned that when he was on this show a few weeks back. I like Nick Richards. He's not Drummond. He's
Right.
younger.
I don't even know what bucket I necessarily put Nick Richards into. Right where you said like,
I was having like a high motor big. Like that's kind of
yeah,
where I have him. And I, if that was the case, you might as well just go and get Nemi, who's got
right. That
more
feels a little bit
size.
more similar, right? And he doesn't have, and Nick Richards also is not bringing a veteran presence as Andre
Exactly.
Drummond, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, it's pretty similar. It's like, why are we going to give up an asset for probably, even though Nick Richards has played in more regular season games than Nemius, it's pretty equal, all things considered.
Yeah, I think that Nemi's probably a bit of a better athlete. I think that he's a little bit more explosive. Richards
Mm-hmm.
is going to have a little bit more polish, a little bit more IQ because of the time he's been in the league, he's been
Right.
afforded more minutes. But if I had to choose between the two, I'm going Nemi just because he knows the system, that continuity that we've spoke about on here. Again, you still have some optionality there. So I'm not really in on Richards. You've already mentioned briefly Olynyk.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he fits the mold, can shoot from free, can playmate, can
That
rebound,
would be
can
a major move in my
major.
I mean that would I think the only scenario in which it's possible is he gets traded and then bought out, but I don't even really see like he's going to get traded to a contender, so that's not really going
Yeah,
to happen if he gets moved. Because that would be the one guy that we've talked about where he's playing every single night and he has a role, right?
yeah,
That would
a
be the
big role.
definitive,
That's the
like
thing.
right, like he would be not, he would take Luke's place in that depth chart, and then he would actually probably take a few minutes from Al or Porzingis, depending on like the matchup in the night. Like he would be he would be on the court every single night if he somehow got brought in.
And then we have the Phil Pressey KO connection again. You know what I mean? So I'm going like the vibes are immaculate here.
Yeah.
The problem is, as we've mentioned, as we've alluded to, the actual legitimacy of being able to carve up or whatever, however you want to word it, that trade scenario and make it work. That it's difficult to get there. You're blowing up so much of the team that you're removing so much continuity. Yes, you're bringing in a huge upgrade, but you're also weakening yourself. You've probably got to make 2 or 3 more pickups, like off the free agent market or the buyout market, to round out that roster. Now, all of a sudden, there's a whole lot. You're injecting 3 or 4 new personalities into this locker room, and that,
Mm-hmm.
like the vibes, that we're speaking about, and that whole kind of protection that you want to keep over the vibes in the locker room at the moment, it goes away. So I'd like KO. I just don't see him as a viable option without risking all the good that's going on
Yeah.
in that locker room. That just
Yeah.
makes no sense.
No, I agree. And so I think it's going to be some minor moves from a Celtics perspective to look out for. The thing that I think most Celtics fans are really going to be interested in is we've already seen, teams like Indiana, teams like the Knicks make big moves with OG and Pascal Siakam specifically to add to their teams. And so I think, last thing I want to talk about here before we wrap this up here, Adam, is that you look around, and if you woke up today, you might have noticed there's a new number 2 in the East. It's the Cleveland Cavaliers, who are 14-1 in their last 15. We've talked before about the Knicks push. We know the Bucks are now, I believe, 1-3 since Doc Rivers took over. The Joel Embiid news came out. They're 4-10 without him, and they're going to kind of continue to move down the standings. The Pacers are getting Halliburton back. They probably are going to move up. The Magic are getting their heads on straight. The Heat, they're just back there. I don't want to talk about them. They're back there. They made the Terry Rozier move already. Maybe they got something else that they got cooking. But when you look around the East, and you can feel free to include the top contenders in the West too, because the Celtics are looking at the finals, right? Like that's where this team has to be for this season to even be close to considered a success. They have to be in the finals for that to be the case. So when you look around, top contenders in the West, the top teams in the East, the Celtics will likely have to match up with at some point. Do you see one particular team or one particular rumored player that could go to X team that you're keeping your eye on that either you think might happen or maybe you just don't want to see from a Celtics perspective?
I think just the Knicks in general are the team that are worrying me at the moment. I know you like the Cavs and the way they're surging. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of that way with New York. I think that OG trade really helped them. Jordan Clarkson to New York, I'm not sure if I'm sold on that. I've seen that rumored a few times. And the reason I'm not sold on it is
simply Brogdon there as well too.
Yeah, now Brogdon's different, and this is where I was building up to. So the Clarkson trade, I think personally, the Knicks would be a bit smart avoiding. And the reason I think that is because they've looked to add firepower without defense in the past, in the form of Kemba, in the form of Fournier. And it doesn't work because if you can't defend, if you're not a two-way capable player, Tibbs isn't going to give you the minutes you need to be successful. And I know that New York's defense is good enough to sustain a Jordan Clarkson, but I think Brogdon's upside as a helper and his IQ and screen navigation just make him a little bit more of a good fit there. His decision making is great. I think that he would be, I wouldn't say an upgrade, but yeah, a slight upgrade maybe on what they were getting from Quickly just because of the veteran savvy. Now, obviously, you're inheriting some injury concerns, but if Brogdon went to New York and was healthy, like I think he makes them a really tough matchup in the postseason for anybody. And with the Sixers losing Embiid, I'm operating under the assumption that if he comes back, he's not the same Embiid that he was like at the start of the season. That's going to take the off season to get him back to that level. And then you look at the Bucks with their defensive issues. I see them as a threat, but I'm not really like quivering right now. New York have a case with Brogdon there too to potentially be a conference finalist, and Boston New York conference finals would be incredibly fun. Like I'd really enjoy that, but two, that's a tough matchup because them guys are just full of DAWG dogs. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and they got and Tibbs has the right guy. I mean, I'm not a big Precious guy. Precious Achiuwa has been really good for them since he came over in that trade as well, right? And they might get Mitchell Robinson back. We'll see when Julius Randle comes back, and so they're actually still doing a lot of this. With OG's been out the last week or so, like they've been doing a lot of this while they're banged up, so they're not even whole yet. So I'm with you on the Knicks, but I think the Cavs are also the team I'm looking at, and they both have, to me, kind of a
scared of Sam Merrill.
What's that?
Is that scared of Sam Merrill?
Not quite. Sam's just shooting the hell out of the ball. Not quite. I'll take our Sam over Sam Merrill for now. We'll see.
For now,
but I think with both the Knicks and the Cavs, while I agree Brogdon would be a good move for the Knicks, what I'm actually more scared of from both perspectives is if they can find a significant wing upgrade. I think each team is one more dynamic wing away from being a really scary matchup for the Celtics. And so I know Mikal Bridges is the big name. I don't think he's going anywhere. No, so I would kind of remove him, but he's been underperforming. But I think here's a couple names that to me would be really interesting if they got moved. And Andrew Wiggins is an interesting name. And like I say, he's underperformed, but as Celtics fans, we know the dark sorcery that can be Andrew Wiggins that we saw in the finals a couple of years ago. I don't want him capturing that magic against us again. Old friend Gordon Hayward. Like, I think Hayward as a two-way guy, if he gets bought out, I don't know. Well, technically, I think the Knicks could move that Fournier contract and get it done if they wanted to spend their, some of their chips to go get Gordon Hayward. But I think him if you slot him in as that wing, think about even in Cleveland, right? If you got Garland, Mitchell, Gordon Hayward, Mobley, and Allen, that's a hell of a starting five. And then you got Max Strus coming off the bench. Karis LeVert, he is what he is, but like that's still another guy. Like you're building something there that is now a lot more formidable. So those are a couple of guys that I'm looking at. Dorian Finney-Smith to a certain probably lesser level than those other two guys I mentioned. But if you give them a wing upgrade, I think those are the two teams that I'm looking at right now where, like you said, the Bucks, of course, they have Giannis, they have Dame. They're going to be top of mind. But, when you change your coaching staff midseason, not a great sign. Their defense is terrible, and I have no idea what assets they have to keep being mentioned in all of these rumors that I see them in. That just doesn't seem really possible for them to make too much of a significant upgrade. Although Bobby Portis for Grant Williams the other day was a rumor, which
that's floated around. I'm going to piss in your cornflakes a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
So I am going to piss in the cornflakes. First one you mentioned was Andrew Wiggins. I think that he is not going to be a trade chip. I think, and the reason I think that is because the Warriors have slotted him into their new look front court. You got Draymond at the 5, you've got Kuminga, you got Wiggins. They look a lot better. They look a lot more versatile, more explosive, more switchy. They've actually been playing at a lot, like a multiple levels above what we'd seen earlier in the season. Wiggins has started to turn it around on both sides of the floor. I think that they're going to be encouraged by that. So I think that Wiggins probably would have been achievable around about the OG Anunoby trade timeline.
Right.
Whereas now I think he's kind of played himself at least into security until the end of the season. Mark Stein reported yesterday that Hayward is not only not a buyout option for Charlotte, but they're also considering looking at ways to keep him beyond his current contract.
I see that. Yep.
I don't know why Hayward would do that. I doubt he does. I see Hayward joining Boston on a minimum to finish that storyline. He's Boston's Cody Rhodes at this point. So
that's a wrestling reference. Actually, I got that one.
You got that one. Okay, I like that. So those are my two kind of piss on your cornflakes type things. I do like DFS as like a plug and play 3-and-D wing to elevate a team like New York or like Cleveland's bench and just be like, yo, we got some additional defense, can put the ball on the floor, can attack closeouts, can defend, can rotate. Like he to me isn't like a ceiling raiser, but he raises your floor, right? And this is how I like to kind of look at it like that. Does he raise your ceiling? Does he raise your floor? I think DFS raises your floor, but not your ceiling. That's okay. When you've got Donovan Mitchell, your ceiling's already pretty high. Do you know what I'm saying? You've got the guy, you've got your go-to guy at the end of games. You just need people that are going to make sure those games are close enough that when you give Mitchell the ball, his efforts actually matter. They make that difference. So DFS to me is actually one of the better fits in terms of like adding a wing for Cleveland that's realistic at this trade deadline.
Yeah. So I think for me, like you said, those are the teams that I'm looking at. What do the Knicks, what do the Cavs do? It'll be interesting. We'll see what happens. As long as you're not pissing in my cornflakes moving forward,
have you heard that reference before?
I have not, but I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I don't. I'm also very glad that I don't eat cornflakes. So therefore, I saw it. It might be pissing in my neighbor's cornflakes. I don't know.
Where did I see it? I'm sure I saw it on like a skit somewhere, and some dude was like, "Man, why you got to piss in my cornflakes in the morning?" And ever since then, it's kind of just one of my go-tos.
Well, I love it. That was great. Pissing in my cornflakes. Well, as you know, folks, do not eat any cornflakes that Adam Taylor
or yellow snow.
You're not quite sure what's in there.
No yellow snow
cones. No yellow snow cones either.
Do you remember the South Park game on the old PlayStation 1? And you could go out and you could play as like Cartman and Kenny, and you'd have snowball fights, and you'd build up like a special, and your special was to like turn it into a yellow snowball and check it at someone's head. Do you remember that?
I never played that. No, but that sounds very South Park PlayStation era. That sounds just about right. That's peak Sony PlayStation and South Park combination right there. But Adam, anything else you want to talk about here before we wrap up?
Nah, man, I'm good. I got to talk some trades. I feel like we had a good, productive conversation where we basically gave everybody updates of thoughts that we've had that we've shared elsewhere, but we've put them all into one podcast.
Put it all together. It's all
Yeah.
coming together here, Adam. We got just about 48 hours left. February 8th, this Thursday, is the deadline. I'm sure we'll pop back on around the time of the deadline. If there's any movement that is significant enough for us to give some thoughts, check back in. I'm sure we will have you locked in. Make sure you guys are following us on YouTube. Make sure you go hit that subscribe button. Make sure you guys got us here on Twitter. Appreciate y'all. Instagram. Also, make sure you subscribe to Celtics Film Room with Adam. He's going to have a bunch
Discord.
of content. Hit the Discord up. Shout out to those of you that gave us a couple of questions today that we were able to get through here. But that's going to do it for this edition of Green with Envy. We'll be back with more later in the week. Celtics Hawks Wednesday night, deadline on Thursday. We'll have more content for you later in the week. Peace, everybody.
Deuce.
Every time I get this high, I lose my mind. It don't take much no more until I hit the floor. Every time I get this high, it's you I find. It don't take much no more until I'm at your door.
You cut me to my core, baby. What can I say? You got me on the floor, you know I came to play. I know I shouldn't, but you seem to take my pain away. And every time I